Okay, so let's talk about the book of Ezekiel. It is for sure a wild ride. I mean, it is just packed with these bizarre visions, really unsettling prophecies, and actions that feel way more like performance art than preaching. It's one of the most fascinating and honestly confusing books in the Hebrew Bible. But what if I told you the key to unlocking its secrets is hiding in a single, glaring contradiction right at the beginning?
So here's the puzzle. Right at the start of his ministry, God seems to give Ezekiel two totally opposite job descriptions. On the one hand, he's a prophet of unavoidable doom. His message is basically, Jerusalem is going to fall. Period. It's a done deal. But then, almost in the same breath, he's also made a watchman, a sentry, whose whole job is to warn people so they can choose to change their ways and be saved. So one job says, it's too late, while the other says, hey, you still got a chance. I mean, that's a major contradiction, right? How can one guy be a messenger of absolute, unavoidable fate and a herald of free will and choice? It just doesn't seem to add up. Well, that's the central mystery we are going to unravel right now. To get to the bottom of these two missions, we're going to lean on the work of biblical scholar Dr. Leslie Allen. He came up with this brilliant solution, and he argues that the key isn't just in what the prophet says, but in the very structure of the book itself. So Dr. Allen suggests we think about the book of Ezekiel like a director's cut of a movie, where the director goes back later and adds in some new scenes. He argues there was an original first edition, and then later on, new material was edited in, creating a second edition that doesn't get rid of the original story, but adds this powerful new layer of meaning on top of it. And here's how that probably went down. The really harsh prophecy of doom, that came before Jerusalem was destroyed in 587 BCE. But the watchman's warning, the message of choice, that actually came from a later time, after the city had already fallen. So later editors took this message about individual choice and, get this, they inserted it back into the earlier chapters. What this means is the book is talking to two different audiences in two different moments in history, all at the same time. Okay, so with that structural puzzle solved, let's dive into that first mission, Ezekiel, the prophet of doom. Before Jerusalem fell, Ezekiel didn't just say his message, he had to live it. He was commanded to carry out this series of really shocking symbolic acts. This was prophecy as straight-up performance art. In total, God had him perform 5 of these dramatic signs, and each one was designed to be this unforgettable living picture of Jerusalem's coming fate. So these acts included being struck totally silent and locked up in his own house, building a tiny model of a city under attack, lying on his side for more than a year, living on starvation rations, and finally shaving his head and his beard with a sword. So yeah, let's break down what each of these pretty strange performances actually meant. First up, the most powerful action was, well, inaction. Ezekiel is told to shut himself in his house, and he's made speechless. This silence was meant to symbolize the huge, gaping distance that had grown between God and his people. The message was in the silence itself. God had nothing left to say. Next, Ezekiel becomes a model builder. He has to sketch Jerusalem on a brick and build these tiny little siege works all around it. But then comes the critical part. He places an iron plate between himself and his little model city. This plate was like an iron curtain, a super powerful symbol that God had turned his back and would not be offering any help. For the third act, Ezekiel's own body becomes a living clock. He has to lie on his left side for 390 days, each day representing a year of Israel's long history of sin. Then he flips over to his right side for 40 more days, symbolizing the 40 years of punishment his people were going to endure in exile. Can you imagine? It was this incredibly grueling performance of cause and effect. The fourth act was all about making the coming suffering feel real. Ezekiel had to live on what was basically a starvation diet, just 8 ounces of bread a day, and it was made from a mix of whatever grains he could find, and a little over a pint of water. This was a direct preview of the horrific famine that was about to grip Jerusalem. And finally, the fifth act. This one's intense. Ezekiel was commanded to take a sharp sword and use it like a razor to shave his head and his beard. Now, in that culture, this was a profound act of public mourning and humiliation. It was a sign that a massive tragedy was coming. But what he did with the hair, that was the real prophecy. He took all that hair and divided it into 3 equal parts. A third of it he burned in a fire, representing all the people who would die inside the city during the siege. Another third he chopped up with his sword for those who would be executed. And the final third he just threw to the wind,
symbolizing the people who'd be driven into exile with violence following them. It was a grim, precise, and totally unavoidable fate.
But hey, remember that inserted director's cut scene we talked about? Well, that's mission number 2. After all that doom and gloom, the book slots in this role of the watchman, which has a completely different feel, a whole new purpose. See, a watchman isn't a prophet of fate. He's a sentry on the wall. His job is just to sound an alarm when danger is coming. And the key difference here is one powerful word: choice. Once that warning is given, survival is entirely up to how each person responds. The responsibility shifts from the entire nation to the individual.
Dr. Allen makes this fantastic distinction here. The first mission, the Doom mission, was about judgment with a capital J, the big, absolute, national judgment on Jerusalem that was simply unavoidable. But the second mission, the Watchman's job, is about judgment with a lowercase j, the conditional, individual consequences that people face based on their own choices. The city's fate was sealed, but an individual's fate, well, that was now up for grabs.
So this second message, then, is actually one of hope, but it's a hope that is rooted in accountability. The warning makes it really clear that God wants people to live, that he takes no pleasure in their downfall. But salvation isn't some free pass. It requires a personal decision to turn things around. In this new reality, both the prophet and the people are held responsible for their actions.
Okay, so this brings us to the big picture. Why structure the book this way? Why would you intentionally stick a message of hope right in the middle of a message of doom? Why make people listen to all the bad news first? Well, Dr. Allen draws this really powerful parallel to the New Testament. He points out that just like the book of Romans starts with the bad news of God's wrath before it ever gets to the good news of salvation, Ezekiel is doing the same thing. You kind of have to understand how serious the problem is before you can really appreciate the solution. Ultimately, the genius of Ezekiel's director's cut is that its literary structure perfectly mirrors its theological message. That unavoidable, terrible bad news of national judgment is exactly what makes the good news of individual salvation and choice not just a relief but profoundly meaningful. It's the contrast that gives the hope all its power. And that kind of leaves us with one last question to chew on. Does good news need bad news to be fully appreciated? Is the darkness necessary for us to truly see the light? That's a question that goes way beyond ancient prophecy, and it gets right to the heart of how we find meaning in our own lives.